What's going on, traders, and welcome back to another YouTube video. So in today's video, we're going to be talking about volatility 100, which is a synthetic indice. And if you've been following me, you know I really enjoy trading synthetic indices. It's sort of where I'm really comfortable trading. If you're not familiar with synthetic indices, however, it is, I mean, in the name, it does say it is synthetics, and it's offered by a broker called Deriv, or formerly known as binary.com. Now, this is something that I really enjoy trading because it's not really involved, in the real market economy. It doesn't necessarily impact any fundamentals, or it's not really impacted by fundamentals and so forth. Right now, you do get some rather dynamic movements in certain instances, but not necessarily, that often. Now, getting back to the video, let me throw in my disclaimer. I'm not licensed or qualified to offer financial investment or trading advice. Everything I speak about on these videos is purely my own opinion, right? I do not recommend trading live capital, but if you do it with capital that you are willing to risk or lose, because you could lose your entire investment, as it's very risky trading leverage products. Now, looking at volatility 100, it's not necessarily something that I do trade actively, but I was going through a few charts, trying to set up my week and so forth. And I came across this, and it does look poised for a really good long-term sell to the downside, perhaps a couple of weeks, whatever your definition of long-term might be, whatever you might be able to find as a result of your trading plan or so forth once you've watched this video. So looking at the weekly chart, let's break down really quickly what's going on over here. What I was looking at is, okay, this is all the data we have on this chart. So for me, that high sort of broke structure in this area here, created that low, formed a lower high, broke structure, created a lower low, formed a lower high, broke structure, created a lower low. We then had this big push to the upside, which is what we'd call a stop hunt or a liquidity grab, if you're familiar with those concepts. And price then ran back to the downside. So that's telling us that that big sellers are still sitting in this area, and they do have an invested interest in keeping price below that area, right? So when we have that breakdown and that does break market structure again, this is still a very strong bearish leg, right? So that's one of the reasons why I was interested in this area. You'll notice I've got this little zone typed in there, which I'll get into shortly. Now, we have this run up, which broke market structure, and then we have this run down, which also broke market structure as well. So we were able to see that this was sort of like a run on the stops on the buy side and a run on the stops on the sell side as well. So this sort of did take out a lot of people out of the marketplace, and it also gave a lot of people who know what's happening the opportunity to trade that and capitalize on that movement. Now, I was interested in this area for those reasons. We've also got this rally, we've got this base, and we've got this drop forming this level of supply in here. So what you can see is that the market came back into that area, and it's now rejected. It's given a very strong bearish engulfing candle close after that area. So that's showing us that the market is reacting quite strongly. So what we would most likely want to do as a result of that is we would want to go down to the lower time frames, and we now want to see confirmations that the market is progressing to the downside. Now, whatever your confirmations may look like, you could think of this as a level of support or resistance, right? So now it would be a level of resistance. We're looking to see the market maintain this as a level of resistance and keep driving lower. Where would I be expecting this market to go? Now, we've got some activity over here, so that could be a logical area to target. But overall, for me, I would be looking at targeting my first TP at around that area and my final TP at around that area if I'm looking to swing this to the downside. Now, I'm not necessarily a swing trader because I just don't have the patience to tolerate, the amount of time to sit in that trade. And number two, I just don't have the emotional capacity, can I say, to handle the fluctuations in profits and so forth. Now, for some people, it might work for them, and they might be able to do that perhaps due to their lifestyle or their personality. And that's very important in trading as well, just as an amateur tip in there. That's very important to understand your personality so that it complements your trading style, right? There's no point in forcing yourself to be a swing trader when you cannot handle the fluctuations of seeing yourself going into $500 profit, $1,000 drawdown, $600 profit, $500 drawdown, and so forth, right? So that's just something I want to throw in there. So those are my long-term downside targets looking at what's happening in here. So what I would then do now is we would drop down to the lower time frame. And what we can see on the lower time frame, which is the daily, which isn't necessarily that much lower, I would generally drop to like the H4, which we'll do so shortly. But looking at the daily, we can see that price came into that area very strongly, right? We can see that there was this minor resistance that formed up into here. So we had a minor stop hunt in here on the daily as well. So we formed that resistance. Price showed forms that it was rejecting. It started to trade lower, and then it traded up, and now it's broken market structure to the downside. Now, as far as I'm concerned, this is not necessarily a valid market structure point. So for me, structure would only have changed in this market once price has traded below this low. So as far as I'm concerned, currently on the daily, price has not shifted in terms of structure, and that's necessarily what I look for as a confirmation when price trades into my zone. Has it is there a shift of structure on the lower time frame? Is there a specific set of patterns that is forming, and so forth, right? Now in this area here, what we can see is if you trade for instance, if you trade head and shoulders, perhaps you might be seeing something like a head and shoulders in this area here, right? If you look at that as a head and shoulders, or maybe you look at this as a head and shoulders, right? And that's a break. And now the market is retesting the neckline or whatever it is, right? For me, as far as I'm concerned, this is what I would look at for now. Now, I can see that at this point here on the H4 chart, we can see that structure has now shifted to the downside. That doesn't necessarily tell me that this trend has changed, but we can see signs that structure has shifted. We then see another pullback again, and price has traded back to the downside again. So that's another sign that structure is shifting. Why? Because we've got a break, right? Sorry, there's no break at that point. The break actually started here, right? But we've got a lower high here that broke structure to the downside at that point. We then have a pullback, and we have another break of structure to the bottom again. Now, my students will know exactly what's happening in this point, and they'll know exactly why price is selling off from this point here, right? As it is something that we look at. And as price is selling off from that point, what I would expect to see is at minimum, I would expect to see price coming back into around, say around this area in here, right? So what we would be looking for is we would be looking at price trading above that area, and we'd be looking at targets in and around this area in here, which is a very healthy, very good trade that you could be sitting in currently. Now, forecasting what might happen next, I would expect price to come and revisit this low, either very close to it, and then begin to trade upwards into around this area before it sells. We get that long sell to the downside, right? Or I would expect price to trade slightly below this level and then begin to move to the upside in again, back into around this area in here before we see those sells back down to the downside. So that would be my long-term plan. So looking at the 4-hour chart currently, that would be my long-term plan. I would be looking at my first possible sell area would be at this old area of resistance in here, right? So I'd be on the lower time frame when price does come back, perhaps from around here, when price comes back into around that area, and then I'd be looking for perhaps my first sells at this area here. If we fail to hold at this area and maybe we get something like that, then I'll be looking for my next sell, say at around this area in here. And I'll still be looking for price to continue lower based on what we looked at on the weekly chart. But that would most likely be my entry. And where would my target be? Those targets that I've looked at on the weekly. So when I enter in this area in here, whether it be in this area or whether it be in this area here, I would be looking to target down to those lows on the weekly. Now, what that simply means, being an intraday swing trader myself, it simply means that I would get in and out of positions perhaps on a daily basis or on a every second day or whatever as the opportunities present themselves, or as I get breaks of structure in my advantage on the H4 or H1 time frame, then I'll begin to jump in and out of trades from that perspective, right? But for now, we're looking at shorts on this market into this low at minimum, right? But in terms of forecasting, I'll be expecting either a break below and then push higher into this area and sell, or this area and sell, right? Or I will be expecting that pull into here and then the market then beginning to break higher, and then again, either a sell from there or a sell from there. All right, so that's basically what I am looking at on volatility 100. I hope that was informative. I hope you're able to get some information out of that, or some education, or even some direction out of that. But until next time, it has been a pleasure as always to share with you guys, and I am wishing you a blessed and profitable remainder of the trading week and a blessed weekend, and I'll catch up with you guys on the next video.